All right, welcome back to the homestead. We're going to get right into it. I want you guys to please spend this next like 11, 12 minutes on listening very closely to what Dr. Malone says, okay? Listen very closely.
So don't tell yourself that it's not going to happen to you. Probability is that you are extremely susceptible to this type of manipulation. Now, some of you may remember my speaking about mass formation psychosis on Rogan. Literally broke the internet. Google had to manually manipulate search results because they didn't like people finding out about those concepts, because they were fundamentally threatening to Google's business model. Okay? But mass formation psychosis is, in mass formation, the process of the formation of crowds, the basis for totalitarianism, is only one aspect of this. That has to do with the fundamental problems associated with social disassociation, with all of you folks sitting here on your cell phones, not being well connected to other members of your community. Bless your hearts for what's happening here. I love it. Where you're all talking to each other. That's how we avoid those kinds of things. But you are all being subjected on a daily basis. You're being bombarded by propaganda, by psychological warfare, by psychological manipulation. Psychological bioterrorism is the use of fear about a disease to manipulate individuals or populations by governments and other organizations such as Big Pharma. Although the fear of infectious disease is an obvious example, it's not the only way that psychological bioterrorism is used. Other examples include propaganda regarding environmental toxins, unsafe drinking water, soil contamination, climate change risk. Another name for psychological bioterrorism is information bioterrorism. And by the way, that process is well defined. There are well-defined steps. If I get time, I'll go through them, that have been developed and deployed by intelligence communities on all sides. Okay? What you have just been subjected to over the last 4 years, it absolutely aligns with well-known processes for manipulating your existential fear of death. It is the most powerful emotion you have, your fear of death. Remember, who read Dune? Fear is the mind killer, right? Fear is extremely powerful. Existential fear can be easily manipulated to get you to do almost anything. And the intelligence community knows this. They built these capabilities over decades, and they've refined it to a fine art. As I said, there's a series of well-defined steps that are used in deploying this. And I'm just going to tell you a little anecdote. The other day I was on X Spaces, Twitter Spaces, with a bunch of folks that have come through the COVID crisis, come through the events associated with the international health regulations and the WHO and all that kind of stuff, and they wanted to talk about bird flu. And what blew my mind is they were completely unaware that they had assimilated all the fear narrative that is being so actively promoted in the media right now about bird flu. And they were regurgitating it to me. Oh my God, this is going to happen again. They're going to use this to manipulate the elections. We're going to have lockdowns. We're going to have masking. They're going to deploy these vaccines, etc., etc. All this fear narrative, all based around the thesis, and people were regurgitating it to me, that this is a highly lethal pathogen. And yet, there is no evidence of sustained human-to-human transmission. There are no cases of hospitalization or death being reported in the United States from bird flu. This is all a manufactured crisis. And it's following exactly, think about it. Just step back for a minute. It is following book, chapter, and verse what got deployed during the COVID crisis. Okay? And yet still, these people that should have been the most sensitized to it, the most aware, were falling right in it. That's how powerful this tech is. You think you can resist it, you can't. My only hope is by getting folks to understand these things, that's why I lecture on it, that you can build some resistance in yourself, intellectually, knowing that these things are out there, that they are being deployed on you. You can cognitively process and be aware that you are being manipulated, and hopefully, just like your awareness of how they sell you soap, okay, propaganda and marketing are kissing cousins. And as Americans, largely, that have grown up under modern marketing techniques, you're fairly resistant to all the methods they have to sell you soap and hamburgers and everything else. It still works, obviously. We've got a population that's getting fat and eating McDonald's all the time. But compared to what happens in the emerging markets, Latin America and Africa, those people are sitting ducks for modern marketing technology. The same holds for psychological warfare, propaganda. Now, I've introduced psychological bioterrorism, psy-war. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what is fifth-generation warfare. And as Americans, largely, that have grown up under modern marketing techniques, you're fairly resistant to all the methods they have to sell you soap and hamburgers and everything else. It still works, obviously. We've got a population that's getting fat and eating McDonald's all the time. But compared to what happens in the emerging markets, Latin America and Africa, those people are sitting ducks for modern marketing technology. The same holds for psychological warfare, propaganda. Now, I've introduced psychological bioterrorism, psy-war. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what is fifth-generation warfare. Fifth-generation warfare has become a mainstay, as I mentioned, of NATO strategy, Russian strategy, battlefield strategy across the world. What does this mean, this term, fifth-generation warfare? Sounds very scary. And it makes it sound as if warfare has discrete stages. Okay? First-generation warfare, sticks and stones. We're throwing them at each other. Second-generation warfare, we have more of a kinetic component, but it's still typically under centralized control. Third-generation warfare. Third-generation warfare is you have increasing decentralization of command chain. Think about the Blitzkrieg. The Germans during World War II were masters of third-generation warfare. They gave battlefield commanders freedom to operate, and they deployed non-traditional means and strategies to overcome their opponent. Fourth-gen warfare, in a nutshell, is what we have seen deployed by Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the Viet Cong. Okay, it's these resistance movements that have typically a religious component, in addition to a kinetic component, kinetic warfare component, guns and tanks and whatnot. Fourth generation warfare, I assert, and many others, the United States military has not won a single fourth generation war. Okay? And with the emergence of fourth generation war, the U.S. military has become aware, NATO's become aware, Five Eyes Alliance has become aware of the crucial importance that is mentioned extensively in The Art of War. I mean, this has been around for millennia, these ideas, that the ability to manipulate one's opponent and the population within one's opponent is the best way to win at warfare, to overcome your opponent. And these guerrilla movements have used it extremely effectively. They don't have to have centralized control. Remember, that's another key thing. Osama got killed, what happened? Boom, total decentralization. It became even harder. All they did was propagate the logic that, well, you got to go out and kill Americans. We really don't care how you do it. We don't care who's leading your particular cell. That becomes extremely effective. You're faced with whack-a-mole if you're an organized military. What are you going to do? Oh, you're going to try to get more expert at using propaganda and information warfare in order to counter the messaging that's coming from your opponent. That's 5th gen. Okay, that is Psywar. That is a technology suite that was built for offshore combat by our military and the UK in particular, working closely with their intelligence communities, to give us new capabilities to counter these insurgency movements. And what's happened is, as often happens with governments and technology in general, once the tech exists, it gets deployed for other purposes that happen to be politically convenient at that time. And I've spoken to many people that have been part of these Psywar units in Europe and in the United States. And a lot of these retired colonels are pretty pissed off because the tech and capabilities that they helped develop for offshore combat, they know are now being deployed against civilian populations. Not just civilian populations, they're being deployed against the populations of their own citizenry. Yes, sir?
What are the recent examples of what
Yeah, there's so in the book we go into it at length. Listing them out, will kill the rest of the half an hour that I've got left. The weaponization of propaganda, the use of, for instance, just to give you one specific example, there's a military battle unit in the UK called the 77th Brigade. And the 77th Brigade also has an informal component that's referred to in social media as the Mutton Crew. Okay? And there's something analogous that the CDC is funded through the public good projects and the Shots Heard Around the World program. Basically, these groups engage in cyberstalking against individuals is one example. So if you're identified, I'll give you a very discrete example. Are you a software person at all? Okay, there's a program that's used in software development and deployment that generates a tracking feature called a Jura ticket. It's one of their outputs. It's when you call in and you complain about some software bug that you've encountered, and they say, oh, we created a ticket for that. Okay, and we'll get back to you after we solve this ticket. And they become very obsessed about fixing it. That's a Jura ticket. Okay? It was recently revealed in congressional testimony and reports that I have Jura tickets that have been developed by the U.S. government that identify me as having certain characteristics. I'm an anti-vaxxer, and I'm a conservative. Those were sufficient to merit the deployment of weaponized propaganda against me in social media, targeting through these various groups like the crowd stalking activities, in which the CDC and in the UK, the 77th Brigade, for instance, targeted Andrew Bridgen. They target me every time I go over there. And you'll see just a slew of concerted trollery attacks and other misinformation and disinformation being promoted against those who have said things which are contrary to the accepted narrative. Just one example. Okay? It's full front media warfare, coordinated and facilitated, in this case, by the federal government. There's another example that's in the book that's come out from congressional testimony about weaponization of other strategies the government deploys in psychological warfare against me personally, but it's been deployed against anybody, journalists, anybody that speaks out in in ways that are contrary to the government's approved narrative that these products are safe and effective. Okay? Safe and effective itself is a psychological warfare tool. This is called neurolinguistic programming. You're seeing it all the time right now in the election. I mean, the election is an amazing little microcosm of this tech. Neurolinguistic programming has to do with messaging, subtle messaging to you that causes you to make assumptions and to embed thoughts. You can think of it as subliminal programming. Okay? Safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. How many times have you heard that? Okay? They never qualify what constitutes safe, nor what constitutes effective. They use those terms. They embed into your lizard brain. And you can't resist them. You assume that they are safe and effective. These have emotional content that comes straight into you. And so you ask for some examples. There's a couple. There's a wealth of these technologies. And they go way down into the weeds in terms of ability to manipulate all kinds of information. This is now core capabilities of the extended PSYWAR units in the United States military, which are extensive. And by the way, that is authorized to be deployed against American civilians by the U.S. Army in the event of a crisis. Another thing we've documented. We've gone right straight down to the manuals. There's all this talk about how the CIA can't deploy psychological warfare and information warfare against American citizens. That's wrong. Okay, that's untrue. Operation Mockingbirds is still ongoing, if you're familiar with what I'm talking about. The manipulation of the press by the intelligence community, and by this now what we mean is the extended intelligence community that largely is centered around Department of Homeland Security. Okay? That is now routinely deployed. Now, I'm never going to get through this topic.
All right, so that might have been probably the best 13 minutes you've spent on the internet today. Please share this video with your friends so we can get the word out. We're getting closer and closer to the election. Things are really going to start popping off and heating up. And we just want everyone to be on the same page, right? We want to understand we're being manipulated. They're using fear. And the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Stay vigilant and in prayer, and share this video with your friends, okay? This was a good one. See you on the next video.
This is a day of national consecration. And I am certain that on this day my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. So first of all, let me assert my firm